Now to Australia and a report about Aborigines. We go to two places south of Darwin. Many Aborigines herd horses, cattle and sheep now. But before the white man came 200 years ago, they were all nomad hunters moving from waterhole to waterhole. A few still live that way. But most of Australia's 100,000 Aborigines have either drifted to the cities or now work as labourers on white men's farms. The change from an ancient tribal culture to a modern society has been a difficult one for them to accept. And among the problems they face are new diseases to which they have no inherited immunity. Canvas and corrugated iron shanties are home for Aborigines on farming stations like this one, 600 miles south of Darwin. The squalor they live in means poor hygiene, and poor hygiene means a rapid spread of infectious diseases. The hot dryness of the outback makes an ideal breeding ground for trachoma, an eye disease that eventually causes blindness if not treated. It's astonishingly prevalent among Aborigines. In fact, 1 in every 4 who reach the age of 60 is blind. Among Australian whites, only 3 in every 1,000 are blind. The government's now launched a $2 million campaign to fight trachoma. The medical experts examining this old woman's eyes are part of a 10-strong team who've spent the past 18 months touring Aborigine settlements in the outback. Their aim is to find and cure as many cases as possible, as well as gather statistics. Eye disease expert Professor Fred Hollows leads the team. They face many problems, and one of the most basic is simply communication. There are hundreds of different Aborigine dialects. The Bushmen can't read or write, so the team use a symbol to test their sight. They point to the way it is facing. The Aborigines often don't realize what's happening and treat the whole thing as a huge joke.
Yeah, go on, son. No, not both of them, just one. Just one eye. Hey, Sergeant. Sergeant, like this. That's it, good.
Organised by the Royal Australian Institute of Ophthalmology, it's the country's first project of this type. The task force have discovered that every Aborigine living outside a major city has at least one blind relative. Half of the rest need treatment by an eye doctor.
Can you see that fella? Good, good. Okay, other eye now. Other eye, Sergeant. Jindakari Milba.
Though only 1% of the population, the Aborigines account for 20% of Australia's blind. This figure is described as a national disgrace by Professor Hollows.
Well, there's no country as wealthy as Australia with as much trachoma, or with it's Australia's gross national product. Trachoma would not be as bad as some countries in the Middle East and in some parts of Africa. But amongst the Aborigines, it's really quite high, quite high.
And what's the reason for that in this day and age?
Poor environmental health conditions, mainly. And why have they got poor environmental health conditions? Mainly because they've been a much neglected group of people who've been subjected to a lot of environmental changes due to the colonisation of Australia, and these haven't been rectified.
The Hollows team arrive at Hooker Creek to visit yet another settlement, this time at a cattle station. It always includes 3 highly qualified experts who each spend 2 to 3 weeks at a time with the team. They're also looking for a lesser-known disease called Labrador keratopathy, which causes blindness among Aboriginal stockmen who spend years in the sun's glare while herding cattle and horses. As nomads, the Bushmen sat in the shade during the brightest parts of the day. Trachoma, it's also known as sandy blight in Australia, occurs when an eye is infected and small particles grow under the eyelid. These cause scars on the eye, and without early treatment by antibiotics, it leads eventually to blindness. There's been a good response to the team at most of the places they've visited.
001 across the top, Jim, and 001 across the top on the left.
We might get you some
ointment to put in those.
The program also helps Aborigines who have poor vision due to other causes by testing their eyes and giving them spectacles. But help's come too late for this old man, totally blinded by trachoma. The professor examines his sightless eyes, but there's nothing he can do. We asked Professor Hollows about the detailed progression of the disease.
Repeated recycling infections because people are living in poor hygiene situations, overcrowded, living in the one place in large groups, recycling infections, and trachoma is the recycling infection of the eye. The chronic bronchitis and bronchiectasis, the chronic rhinitis, the chronic otitis media is the chronic recycling infection of the upper and lower respiratory systems.
Are Aborigines living in these conditions from choice?
Not really, insofar as the exigencies of survival decide their choice. If you're going to Aborigines are living in groups in one place because this is the way they can survive better in terms of food supply. And they can no longer forage over the countryside because this has been taken over and this provides food for cattle and all sorts of things now.
Conditions in the outback may be grim, but the task force aren't always working in shanty villages or isolated farmhouses.
Good, you might see them here, I think. A few little white dots, not very severe in this case.
They've discovered trachoma particles in as many as 70% of children in some bush communities. Early attention's essential because there's no effective vaccine yet against the disease. Half the medical team are themselves of Aboriginal descent, a deliberate and important part of the program. Professor Hollows believes Aborigines should be involved in their own future, instead of letting it be decided wholly by the white man. Wherever the team goes, it tries to interest the bush people in its work. But the professor stresses they don't want to force themselves on the communities.
We try not to. We're under considerable pressure to cover every Aboriginal camp in Australia and report to the government. Our college has this responsibility to get this work done in a limited time, and it's wise that it be done quickly. But we try. In fact, we are only successful insofar as we can establish rapport, cooperation, and get advice and assistance from the Aboriginal organisations as they exist.
You were saying a moment ago that you believe that Aborigines should be more involved in the health care of their own people. Is that one of the changes, the patterns you'd like to see implemented?
Yes, I would like to see Aboriginalisation of health services. I don't just mean getting Aborigines into the bottom of the health hierarchy. I would like to see Aboriginal groups deciding policy, hiring and firing white resource persons, and shaping the pattern of health activities in their communities.
After 18 months of travelling through the sparse vastness of Western Australia, South Australia and the Northern Territory, the team have already covered half the Aborigine population. They've still got 6 months to go, so by then they should have a good idea of how widespread trachoma is. Follow-up programs have already been started. But officials stress that the Medicos Marathon Tour is a service and not a mere survey. It's already discovered hundreds of blind Aborigines in outback areas that health authorities didn't know about. Now they've been registered and receive official aid. Can trachoma ever be eliminated from Australia's interior? Professor Hollows.
Oh, I feel confident it will. I think the Australian people have given government a mandate to get rid of this condition from Aborigines and to provide what's necessary for reasonable eye health to all people in the centre of Australia, and I'm sure this will happen in our time.
The National Trachoma and Eye Health Programme has begun an enormous task. But it's already done enough to give renewed hope to a new generation of Aborigines.